Welcome to New York City and Mission City Church. We're here to connect people with God and with each other. We hope you're encouraged by this week's message.
I was talking to my brother-in-law last week. He and I connect about once every 2 weeks. And we just talk about, it's our way of staying connected. He lives out of state. And so we stay connected that way. And we talk about pretty much everything that's going on in life. It's one of those kinds of friendships, relationships, family connections. And because he and I are so close, he lets me know what's going on in his life. And he said he is a middle school volunteer at their local church. So he serves with his church's middle school group. Part of serving with your church's middle school group means, in his case, that he is serving with a bunch of 6th to 8th grade boys, and part of that job is getting 6th to 8th grade boys to sit in a circle and have a sober-minded conversation about things that matter. And as you can imagine, that is a near miracle. There's like the parting of the Red Sea, and then there's like, middle school boys having a conversation about things that matter, sober-minded, okay? So it is near miraculous. But one time they are in a circle recently, and he said, one of my boys last week in the middle of our youth group time asked a question about lust. And as soon as that word came out, the reactions were quite varied. A couple of kids kind of shift uncomfortably in their seats, like, oh no, here it comes. And a couple of kids stare off into space, like, when's snack time? Because they're just not attuned to the conversation yet at this point. And there's just an entire variety of perspectives. And I told him, I remember having the same moment. I used to serve as a youth pastor myself. And I remember trying to have a conversation because the topic came up and you want to say something. You don't want to say too much, of course, to a group of young guys, but you also don't want to say too little and let the world do all the talking, so you want to say something helpful. And so I remember looking around this group, at one point in the past, my own group of youth young men at the church, and realizing okay, I think I'm 90% sure that kid is so young that his feet don't even touch the floor, his feet are swinging, and I'm 90% sure that kid on the other side of the circle might have a condom in his pocket, with intent for the weekend. You know what I'm saying? I'm pretty. This is a wide variety of different perspectives here going on in the middle school moment. Okay, so I bring this up to you because tonight in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 through 30, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount turns his attention to the subject of lust. And in our day and age, and in our culture, and in our city, and perhaps even in this very room, there's a variety of perspectives. There are a variety of perspectives around sexuality and what an improper use of it is. So if you want a working definition tonight for what the word lust means, we could just say an improper sexual desire. That's maybe the best umbrella, most simple term we could use. And the question that will bring us together tonight would be, what do you have to say about it, Jesus? So what do you have to say, Jesus? This is Jesus driving. Jesus is the most famous person in the history of the world. The Sermon on the Mount is his most famous speech. And these are some very famous words on the subject of improper sexual desire. So the question that should bring us together is, what do you have to say about the proper and improper use for sexual desire? Jesus, will you please answer my question? Now, if this was 50 years ago, at this moment, we would just go to Matthew 5:27, and we would answer that question right here and now. Because 50 years ago, there were a few conditions that are no longer present. Number one, by and large, a Christian sexual ethic and the surrounding culture were at least mutually intelligible. Okay, so say 50 years ago in New York City, the Christian church's sexual ethic and the sexual ethic of, say, the sidewalk generally are living on the same planet. They understand one another to some degree. And the Christian teaching about sexuality wasn't just entirely foreign or alien, if you will. Second, the church was considered helpful. It had institutional trust, and the church was by and large considered helpful on any subject it touched, including sexuality, or at least it was considered benign. It won't hurt. You know what I'm saying? So it was at least considered that the church could say something helpful on the topic, or at least say something not hurtful or harmful on the topic. And because of that, a wise pastor's starting point and on a sermon about sexuality 50 years ago in this very city would have been just to start answering people's questions, because people are asking, what do you have to say about it, Jesus? And then a wise pastor would just simply start to answer that question. But things might have changed just a bit in the last 50 years, as you are no doubt aware. And so the conditions today are quite different. In all three ways of the conditions that I just named, they've all changed. So now, a Christian sexual ethic and the surrounding culture, the surrounding sexual ethos that is our city and our nation and our Western world, essentially, is less and less mutually recognizable and mutually intelligible. So a Christian sexual ethic is more foreign and more alien to our city. In fact, when I told you this was the topic, some of you were like maybe checking your phone. How long is this going to be? Is this going to go okay? Should I pretend I'm going to the bathroom and then actually leave and maybe come back next week? So because the church is just simply not considered an authority on the subject anymore. In fact, we have moved from being viewed as I'm talking about the church here, we have largely moved from being a helpful influence on the subject to being demoted in the eyes of culture, to not even being really a neutral influence on the subject, but perhaps even being a negative influence on the subject, that maybe the Christian church is sexually backward, sexually repressive, a relic of a past society, maybe even just like anti-sex in general. I mean, after all, the thinking goes, why would we ever resist what our bodies want in the first place? Wouldn't it be better just to be totally free and totally without restraint? Wouldn't that be more helpful? And then therefore the church is considered not helpful, not neutral, maybe even a harm to healthy sexuality and an impediment, certainly an impediment to sexual progress. So the cards are kind of stacked against me, which is why today you want to be glad that you have your job and not mine, because this is a tough 30 minutes here. Based on our starting point. However, I count it a privilege. And a wise pastor, I think in this particular context, a wise pastor's starting point might not be to start answering people's questions, but maybe just to get people to question their answers that they already have. So if that's you tonight and you're like, you know what, I think I already have my answer. I don't think my answer on sexuality is Jesus. You get the whole first 5 minutes here as an introduction. So the next 5 minutes is totally for you. We're about to in just a moment, we're going to circle to Matthew 5, 27 and 30, which you heard read earlier. And we're just going to let Jesus drive this whole time. But if you're the person who's like, you know what, I already got my answer and I'm not sure it's Matthew 5, 27 through 30, I would love, and your answers are already what I just described, I would love to think through that with you just for a moment. So this part is entirely for you. And let me say, first off, that the church and all of its individuals have failed significantly on the subject. So I'm not up here because I'm a perfect person. I'm not up here because, in fact, sexual imperfection would be like a really soft way to put the things that I was engaged in before I started to walk with Jesus and live like I was walking with Jesus. So I am not up here because I have a perfect track record, and I am not up here because the church has a perfect track record. The church has mishandled this topic in countless ways. Abuse is one, failure to report is another, sexual misconduct in the pastorate is another, hypocrisy is another, an overly restrictive or negative view of sex imparted to children today, often looked back on and called purity culture, is another. So I am an imperfect person teaching from an imperfect institution. So that part we can assume from the start. But I would like to tell you, did you know, or ask you, did you realize that the Christian church, Christian sexual theology, actually reshaped the world for better because it was a compelling social vision 2,000 years ago when it was first announced, and a compelling even sexual vision. Did you know that? So think about this for a moment. One of the philosophies, let's go back in our time machine for a second. One of the philosophies surrounding Christianity when it was born 2,000 years ago was a very specific philosophy that was anti-physical. It was called Gnosticism. There's not a quiz. You don't have to remember the word Gnosticism. But there was a very, this sounds strange to us because Gnosticism is not really around in any like visible or recognizable form anymore. But this had a very, very specific idea of what was good and what was bad. It goes like this. Everything spiritual is good. Everything physical is bad. That's Gnosticism in a nutshell. So everything spiritual is good. So ideas and feelings and emotions and worship and heavenly thoughts and basically anything that draws you into the spiritual realm is considered good. But anything that's physical draws you down, away from what is heavenly, away from what's divine, okay? So spirit good, body bad. Well, of course, if you take the conclusions of that, this is not, by the way, a biblical teaching. This is a false worldview. But if you extend that, of course, how do they apply it? Of course, back then, they applied it to believe that marriage was unholy because marriage involves sex, and sex was considered bad. In fact, they went so far in this way of thinking that they started to tell themselves there was a heresy that Jesus didn't even take on a physical body. He wasn't in the flesh. He just appeared as someone who actually had a physical body. That's how far this particular group took the belief that anything physical was bad. And there are significant parts of the New Testament that actually correct that say if you forbid marriage, that you're doing a disservice to people. Did you know that if you read the New Testament carefully, it actually warns married people not to stop having sex. It tells people that would be a problem for their marriage and would cause unnecessary temptation. Okay, so the Bible, and by the way, there's a book in the Old Testament called the Song of Solomon. If you think the Bible's boring, I just recommend, before you sleep tonight, I just want you to go read that, and you're going to think it's like a metaphor about two people like playing in a garden, and it is not about two people playing in a garden, okay? It is way turned up. And I'm telling you, in fact, Jewish boys were not even allowed to read the thing until they reached a certain age, okay? Because it is way, 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 way hot and heavy, okay? So that is in your Bible, okay? So the Bible's not prudish. The Bible is not sexually repressive. That is just completely not true. So while Christianity certainly did define a proper venue for sexuality in a man-wife marriage, it never restricted the concept of sexuality itself or rebuked the human desire for it. So if you want to have sex, congratulations, you're human, you're made in the image of God, and he put that desire there so everybody can just exhale. I'm not about to get up here and tell everybody that you shouldn't want to have sex, okay? So the Bible never actually does that. But what it does do is put the proper boundaries in place, the proper restraints in place, so that sexuality can actually flourish, which brings me to this idea. Do you really think it would lead to freedom if there was no such thing as sexual restraint? Some people believe, and have acted on, and I know this because this is the very experiment I ran as a young man, and I ran into a dead end, and it left me miserable. Some people live and are ready to act out as if maybe if we just remove all sexual restraint, maybe there's some kind of win-win out there for everybody, and that's not true. If we erase all sexual restraint and just say, you know what, we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, somehow there's going to be some kind of a win-win, it's never a win-win. It's a win-lose. Because you just go look for somebody to use, and they take turns using you. And it is a dead form of human sexuality that actually debases us. So what we must do instead is we must realize that when Christianity was born into the world, it was born into a Greco-Roman society that was sexually broken in ways that I don't care how far you consider yourself to be out there. Greco-Roman world 2,000 years ago would have made you blush, okay? So the Greco-Roman world, you could do anything you wanted with whoever you wanted, anytime you wanted. And Christianity birthed into the world a sense that morality was tied to sexuality because people are made in the image of God, and you don't get to do whatever you want with a man, woman, or child. Particularly, one of the things that was broken is that a man in Greco-Roman society could have sex with whoever they wanted. Man, woman, boy, grown, doesn't matter. Prostitute, doesn't matter. And a woman, of course, was supposed to just sit and wait for his desire to land on her. She had no options whatsoever. And Christianity bursts onto the scene and tells men that they're supposed to be one-woman men. And all of a sudden, marriages started to flourish. There are even some scholars who say that Christianity flourished because women were given a forward place and were considered to have sexual rights, people. So did you know, I'm trying to tell you one simple thing, that Christianity was a sexual revolution in the right direction. And we have no credit for that these days. Nobody knows that. Very few people are aware that that is the case. So look, if you're in a place tonight where you're like, you know what, I don't think I'm ready to ask, what do you say about sexual desire, Jesus? Maybe you're not ready to ask that because you already have some other answer. And if you're not ready to ask that question, that's okay. But I just want you maybe to question your answer. And maybe that would be enough for tonight. Now, that said, let's let Jesus drive the rest of our time because he has brilliant things to say if your heart and mind are so open. Here they come. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.'" So when he says you've heard that it was said, he's of course referring to the Hebrew Bible, which was at that time quite old, hundreds and hundreds of years old, parts of it even as old as 13 or 1400 years old. So it was very, very familiar to people, in his audience, exactly what this was. And he quotes, "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.'" So if you know the 10 Commandments, this is included in the 10 Commandments. This is one of the 10 most famous rules for humanity of all time. All right, which is not to commit adultery, meaning do not participate in sexual relations when one of the participants is married. That's what adultery was defined as. And he says, look, you've heard that. Everybody knows don't cheat on your spouse. And then he says something interesting. "But I say to you," which at this point, if you're listening, you immediately only have two options because he just removed all middle ground. He's either God because he's coming on top of the scripture and expounding the scripture, or he's a lunatic. Like, those are your only two options. As soon as he says, "Now look, I know you've heard in the 10 Commandments, but what I'm going to tell you," you know immediately you're either dealing with God or you're dealing with a maniac, a crazy narcissist. Like, there's just no way, crazy hubris, unhealthy personality kind of person. Okay, so he removes all middle ground just by saying, "But I say to you," as if authoritative. All right? So you have to make that decision too at some point in your life. You got to decide, okay, is he crazy or is he God? This is a decision we all have to make. "But I say to you," and what does he say? "That everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So the concept of adultery is expanded significantly from actually committing the act to the desire that's already there. If you're thinking, let me understand that. How can it be that adultery could have already been committed? And change the emphasis of the words and see what he says. He says the reason it's already happened, look at the word looks. Everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. In other words, what he's trying to show us is that healthy sexuality involves not just how you're acting, but what you're wanting. So healthy sexuality always involves not just how you're acting, but what you're wanting. And if you don't realize this, then you'll have an immature sexual standard. And by the way, you'll become an immature person because immature standards lead to immature people. All right. So you have to realize God is asking me to think not just about what I'm doing. I don't know about you, but I was raised with a bit of a mentality. And when I say raised, I'm not blaming parents. This is likely me. But I was thinking, you know what? There's probably some behaviors that are like on the like don't do list, and then there's probably some behaviors that are like, oh, it doesn't even matter. But as far as wants, who cares? As far as imagination, who cares? And I was just thinking, you know what, there's probably like some yes-no list. And in fact, that's not how it works with God at all. He's asking for our entire thought life. He's asking for it to bring sexuality underneath his kind command and his direction. He's asking for the entire person. I mean, think about this. How unhealthy would it be if you show up to community group one week at a church called, I don't know, Mission City, and you show up and it's a bunch of guys, and some guy shows up and says, guys, I want to ask you a question. Did anybody cheat on their wife this week? And they all say, no, but we wanted to. I'd say, I appreciate the honesty, but something's broken here. Okay, this is not good. This is not where we want to live. This is not where we want to be. Okay, where we want to be is we want to have our heart and our mind and our thoughts engaged with God in a way that his desires shape what we see and want. Not just what we do at the end of the day, but which matters too, big time, but what we see and what we think about and what we dwell on and what we fantasize about and what we want inside our hearts and inside of our minds. But you know what? It's true, as we all know just by human experience, that sometimes our hearts and eyes and minds do want the wrong thing. In which case, what should you do? Jesus' answer seems to be along the lines of whatever it takes, because he says some crazy things. Here they come. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Now, some of you are very literal, and you're like, really? Should this happen? I would love to tell you, if you tear your eye out because it looks at a woman or man lustfully, you still have another eye. So it could go wrong after that. So I'm not certain that this is entirely literal. I am certain he's describing a whatever it takes mentality to fighting sexual sin. He says, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better, let's just make a values choice here. Let's compare. What would be better? For one part of your freedom, one part of your ability, one part of your personhood to be lost, to lose one of your members, and that your whole body be thrown into hell. Which is a word that just so nails on a chalkboard to us at this point in the game. What Jesus is trying to tell us is this, that the sexual part of the self can determine outcomes for the whole self. Because sexuality, think about this. Sexuality is just a part of the self, right? It's not the whole self. I know there's a middle school joke in here somewhere about, if you believe sex is life, then of course you wouldn't believe sex is just a part of life. You would say it is life. But of course you wouldn't mean that. It would be a joke, right? And it would be a lie. All of life does not equal sexuality. Sexuality is a part of life. It is a section of life. But that little section of life is extremely powerful because it can determine consequences for the whole self. So if you make a decision, it's possible to make sexual decisions that impact your whole self, your entire life set of outcomes. And I remember just as a 14-year-old just feeling like the false sense of originality that most young generations feel whenever they come of age. I remember being 14 years old thinking nobody has ever wanted sex like I want sex, and nobody has ever had sex like I'm about to go have sex. It's just insane the lies we tell ourselves. And I just thought I was going to unleash myself on the world and have so much fun. And instead what I ended up with was a train of bad relationships, a bunch of girls who warned each other about me, do not mess with that guy, and a bunch of breakups and a bunch of apologies to give and a whole lot of habits to break when I finally became a Christian. And I realized, wait, I thought I was just having fun with a part of life, and instead my whole life was now affected. My emotional life was affected. It literally led to depression, all right? It does not go well if you let the sexual part of yourself determine unhealthy outcomes for the whole self. So Jesus is trying to draw our attention to that fact. And he's saying, look, if you've got one part of your life or body or freedom that is costing you freedom in the end, you might want to remove the freedom on the front end, so that way you don't have to pay the consequences at another time. He's trying to preserve us. Do you see this? He's not threatening us. He's not against us. He's trying to preserve us. The only reason God would ever give a restricting command is to preserve life. I have a 4-month-old daughter. When she is old enough to trot around the house, I will tell her not to trot with scissors in her hand. And the only reason, that may seem terribly restrictive. I mean, what if she's running to an arts and crafts project? I mean, what if she's trying to do something? I mean, she may have her own perfectly good reasons, but I'm saying, listen, you are absolutely not going to run in this house with the scissors in your hand for one reason. I want to preserve your life. So when God gives a restricting command, you see it's only to preserve life. And when he gives a restraining thing here about how to use sexuality and how not to, and to be careful with it, he's trying to preserve your life. Because as you may have noticed, it does not go well when we ignore the ways of God. We always reap the consequences, and he's just trying to spare us that on the front end. He goes back and restates his case. He says, if your right hand causes you to sin. Okay, listen, we're adults in the room. I'm just going to tell you. Some people believe that Jesus never mentions masturbation anywhere in the Bible. I am not sure that this isn't it, okay? We're talking about lust. Well, I'm dead serious. I can't prove it. I can't get in the Greek. There's no Greek, it was written in Greek. So I can't go in the Greek and tell you for sure. I don't know for sure. Nobody knows for sure. Beware the preacher who says he knows for sure. But I am 90% there that this is what is going on, okay? When he's saying this, he's talking about sex, and he's talking about the temptations from within, and he's talking about the parts of your body that cause you to sin. It seems clear to me, all right? So this is it. But he said, whatever he means, whether it's metaphor or whether it's literal, he says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, same point, for it's better for you to lose one part of your members than that your whole body go into hell. He is trying to tell us that healthy sexuality involves keeping in mind what you want ultimately, not just immediately. Think of it this way. Sexual desire can cause a person to want immediately what they do not want ultimately. Sexual desire can make a person want right now what they do not want in the end. And all of a sudden, some of you have had this experience, just like I just shared with my story, where you get to the ultimate part of the story and you go, wait, this is not what I wanted at all. How did I get here? And the sad and disappointing answer is because one day I wanted it. That's how I got here. Because the sexual part of the self can tell the self, this is going to be immensely satisfying, and what I want in the immediate somehow overshadows what I want in the ultimate. And then as consequences go through life, you realize this is not what I wanted in the end at all. And by the way, this is not just a Christian experience. This is a human experience, okay? This is a human experience. This is a thing where you go, okay, you think in the moment, okay, I'd like to have this experience with this person. But if someone came up to you right then and says, do you ultimately want to be in a drama-filled relationship with an ex for the rest of the rest? Because that's what this person is going to turn into. You would say no. But we don't think in terms of the ultimate too often. We think in terms of the immediate. And Jesus is just trying to warn you, don't follow something immediately that you don't want ultimately. And he draws this even to a salvific sense, heaven and hell. He says, don't let the world drag you away from God in this way. So he escalates the issue as high as you can possibly escalate it. Now look, if you are a Christian in this space, and you actually have decided, I am trying to follow Jesus with my sexuality. The world is not, I'm not waiting on the world to start. I'm just going to follow Jesus, and I'm going to try to honor God with my sexuality. If you've made that choice, and you're struggling or having a hard time, I want to just share three things. Tips, if you will, because sexual addiction is what God broke in my life. In this season of coming to Jesus that I described about a decade ago, I was so addicted to pornography that I would break commitments to stay home and watch. I was sick, I was ill. And I thought in my early Christian journey, I guess I'll just have to find a way to be a disappointed Christian forever, I guess. I guess just every time, forever, I guess there's going to be my relationship with God and my relationship with porn. And I guess it's just going to be how I'm going to have to go through life. I was so disappointed and I was so stuck. And I am now delivered from that as far as the East is from the West. So I give God complete credit for that. It's not self-effort. I can tell you that. It is the kindness of God changing people. But here's what I want to do. If you're in that spot where you're like, I'm kind of stuck, and I'm kind of thinking those thoughts you know what, maybe it'll just be God and my sexual sin for the rest of the rest, and I could use some encouragement. I just want to leave you with three things, three tips, if you will, for the journey of fighting this sin, if you have the courage to call it sin. Tip number one, if you can't win the fight, just leave the fight early. All right, if you can't win the fight, again, meaning you're in a tempting situation, just leave early. Let me give you a hypothetical example. All right, I'm sure this has never happened to any of you. Somebody texts, and you just know when that somebody texts at that time of day, those particular words, you just know it ends in sex. In fact, they could have, it doesn't matter if they say it or not. You just know, like, that's kind of how this relationship works. That's kind of what this text is about. And you just know that you know when you get texted at 8 p.m. that it is, you know, do you want to come over? That it's not because you guys are going to have like a great verbal and deep conversation. You know what I mean? Like, you are well aware of where this is intended to go, right? So let's say at that moment that text comes in, you have, think about it, a very wide door to exit this temptation from. Like, you could not answer, you could say no, you could delete this person's number, you could do anything that you want to do, but the way to exit the temptation is very wide. I mean, the road away from this choice is very broad. I mean, it'd be very easy to say no at this point, right? But I'm sure no one in this room would ever do this, but let's just say you responded, yeah, sure, why not? And you think, you know what? All right, God, me and you, this time, I'm going to go over to this person's house, but nothing's going to happen, all right? Because I'm going to walk with the Holy Spirit, and nothing's going to happen. And then let's say you get over there, okay? And then you're in the Netflix portion of the Netflix and Chill event, okay? And so you're watching TV, and you're like, got your eyes glued on the TV, because tonight's going to be different, and you got your eyes glued on the TV. Okay, at this moment, you still could exit. I mean, you could, it's going to be a little harder now because like now you're already in the middle of like an event, you know what I'm saying? But you could still be like, you know what, something came up, I got to go, you know, or you could get out of it, right? But let's say you're like, nah, I don't have to leave. I'm going to win the fight. So I'm just going to stay right here. And then they start getting frustrated because they haven't made this deal. You know what I'm saying? They're like, they haven't decided that it even is a fight. Their fight is to have sex. Like, that's what they're trying to do. So like, they're like, do you want to drink? And you're like, nah. And they go pour themselves one anyway. You know what I'm saying? In this hypothetical illustration. And then they come back and sit a little closer on purpose. And you just like, look at the TV. Okay, at that point, you still could leave, but you see the door is getting a little narrower. Do you understand? And then let's say in this hypothetical example that this person turns now a glass of wine in and makes eye contact with you and says, what is the matter with you? Let's have sex. Okay, at that point, you could still leave. You could fake a stomach bug and be like, I'm so sorry. Like, but now you see the door is very narrow. You see what I'm saying? Here is why there's so much sexual failure in the Christian church. People aren't wise enough or humble enough to take the exit early. Take the early exit. Exit through the wide door early in the night. Just say no early. Don't try to stay in the ring like you're going to be this sanctified person in a situation where it's impossible to stay sanctified. Just say no early. So look, if you can't win the fight, don't be in it. Just leave the fight early, people. Just don't go. All right? So not having the humility and the foresight to see that has caused so many downfalls, okay? Don't try to go into a terrible situation that you know is not going to be productive and just decide that you and God are somehow going to get through it. He's telling you, don't go, all right? So let's have the wisdom there. Okay, tip number 2. If you can't win the fight, leave the fight entirely. So not partially, not kind of, just get out. A year ago in the summertime, we went to, a group of us from the church here, went to a beach. And it was a certain beach where if you want to get a tan with no tan lines, you can do that. All right. So, but we were thinking, at the time, we were thinking, you know, we're going to like 10 a.m. Okay. I think it was on a Sunday morning. We're like, nobody at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning is going to be making use of I can get a tan without a tan line, you know, permission slip. Like, there's no way that's going to be happening. Okay. So there's 10 of us from the church, who presumably are trying to, you know, run Jesus' offense with sexuality. And so we're hanging out at the beach. All right. And then, like 50 feet away, there was a girl who decided that was the day that there were going to be no tan lines, okay? And so she was just probably from here to the street, maybe even a little closer. And like, I'm just going to be real with you. I'm a human being, okay? And so I like felt my face like magnetized to look, as if drawn, as if someone like made me look. And so I like started to look, and then I looked away, and I thought, my wife is right here. What is the matter with me? But you know, it was like magic. I just felt my face turn back again, and I looked away, and I thought, what is the matter with me? I'm a pastor. Our people are right here. Our church is right here. This is ridiculous. And I felt my face turn again, and I realized, you know what, something's got to be done. So I reached in my eyes, and I took my contacts out, and I threw them in the sand. And I won, people, because I couldn't see anything, all right? I could see my book, all right, and I could see my friends, and she got the tan, and I couldn't see anything, and everybody wins, all right? So listen, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you can't win, just leave. Just leave. The reason I did that is because I realized, number one, I don't have to drive home. I have friends. And number two, I'm not going to win. There is no amount of sexual self-control. There's a half-naked woman right there. I am not going to win. So if you're going to win, if you can't win, just quit, okay? Just quit. Do you know my brother-in-law that I mentioned earlier? He has an amazing story of recovering from drugs and alcohol. It almost killed him. And he recovered from drugs and alcohol. And he said, do you know what every alcoholic's dream is that keeps them addicted? They want to dream that they could just have one drink and stop. Or that they could just stare at alcohol and it'd be in the same room with them, but them have so much self-control that they would just stop. Because, if something is ruining your life and you don't have any self-control whatsoever, your greatest dream would be to have unlimited self-control. Well, I have news for you. None of you have unlimited sexual self-control. I don't either. If you can't win, just leave. All right, this is why 1 Corinthians 6 says, flee from sexual immorality. Don't sit there all day and resist sexual immorality as if that's the ultimate virtue. Leave. Flee from sexual immorality. And then tip number 3. If you can't win the fight, remember that's changeable. Victory is possible, people. We get so beat down on this. We get so beat down. We get so tired of it. We get in our cycles and we get upset with ourselves and we feel disappointed with God and we feel like God's disappointed with us. And we just get bogged down and we think, this is going to be a part of my life for the rest of my life. And that is just not true. In fact, that's what will keep you sick, is thinking that this is just my lot in life and this is just my Christian journey and I'm always going to have some second tier experience with God because I'm not going to be able to get sexual sin out of my life. That is a lie. That is just a lie. I've seen too many people get well. Do you know what that's called? That lie is called terminal uniqueness. So terminal means it's a disease where you think, and uniqueness means you're unique. So you have the disease where you think you're terminally unique. You're the only one of your kind. No one's ever had your problem. Nobody's ever gotten well from your problem. And you just think, well, this is going to be me forever and ever and ever. None of us are terminally unique. We're all broken. Christ is the solution. Walk with the Spirit. Get into community. Join a church. Share with them every single time something goes wrong. Confess ruthlessly. Let people encourage you constantly, and you will change. It's the recipe that God has given us to fight sin and walk with Him through His people, through His Word, and through His Spirit, and you will get better. It will change. I'm telling you, it's amazing. I sometimes talk to people after services or at events like this, after conversations like this, and some guy will come up and he will say, it's the same thing. It's like they're reading off a script together. They'll say, I'm glad it happened for you, but I just don't think I can ever get free. And I'm like, really? Really? I'm like, here's what you need to do. You need to join a church. You need to start to pray. You need to read the Bible. You need to confess every time something's wrong. You need to get in a small group. You need to let yourself be encouraged, and you won't recognize yourself in 6 months. And the guy says something like, that will never work for me. And I'm like, really? It worked for the 10 people that are around you. You're terminally unique. That's your greatest problem. You think you're unique, and God can heal us all, and you are not unique. Your problem is not unique. We suffer from loneliness, which is part of our problem on this subject. So it is possible to change. One of my best friends in the world once tried to tell me this. He said, I don't believe it. I'm like, what? You don't believe what? He said, I don't believe that there was a day when you were as bad off as me. And I said, what are you talking about? He starts to get mad. He's like, you were, he was very vocal. He's a very vocal human being, and we had a lot of trust. So you were not as addicted to porn as me. And I said, first off, I'm not sure that comparisons are like what we're going for here, but I'm just telling you that's why you won't get well, is because you're going to tell yourself that you're unreachable by God. Like God just can't possibly get to you. And that is just a lie, and it keeps people beat up, not because sexual sin is undefeatable, but because they think it is, which costs people. Listen, I'll close by simply sharing this idea with you. The reason we all have a sexual desire is because we want to be fully known and fully loved. That's what a sexual desire is. We want to be fully known and fully loved. If you want a good definition for intimacy, it's to be fully known and fully loved, and to know fully and to fully love. And if you want a good definition for insecurity in any area, it is to fear that if I'm fully known, I won't be fully loved. That's what insecurity is. And so this is why in the beginning it says that man and wife were naked and unashamed. But in the end, when we look at the end of time, we look at the book of Revelation, we look at the great future that we all long for, we don't see human marriage and sexuality restored. Actually, it gives way to all humanity's ability just to relate to God face to face, to know and love and be known and be loved by God. So did you know marriage and sex is a temporary thing that was always designed to have an end date on it, because it's just designed to point to something greater, to point to the love of God, which fully knows us, fully loves us, and to one day in the eternal state, look forward to a place that's not built around sexuality. It's built on what sexuality was always meant to point towards, which is the unchangeable love of God for each one of us. So if you want to be known and loved, and I know you do, you have that today. In the person of God, in the person of Christ. It's not later, it's not after you clean yourself up, it's not another time, it's not next year. It is right, and it's not even just heaven, it is right now. There is a God who fully knows you and fully loves you. And all of this journey, as Jesus is guiding us tonight, on resisting improper sexual desire, that entire journey is not something we do so that he will know us and love us. It's something we do because he already knows us and loves us. He knows us. He knows what we want. He knows what we need. And he loves us enough to guide us on the subject for sure. But he also doesn't rebuke us for our desire. He also doesn't rebuke us for our past. Rather, he embraces us, forgives us, and then is so bold as any healthy parent would be to guide us in the direction we should go to experience flourishing. Okay? It is possible. There is more. There's more health. There's more flourishing than you thought was possible for you. I have no idea. God is not a gumball machine where you put in holiness and then you get back a great sex life or something like that. So I want to just caution you. I'm not making any sort of a deal with you tonight that if you start to follow God, you'll get married or your sex life will change within your marriage. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you start to follow God, it will be well with your soul. That's all I'm saying. I don't know how it goes. The specifics up to him, but I do know that you can be well. You can be well. All right. Let's pray together. Jesus, you love us as you find us. You're so kind. You're so kind and gracious to forgive. You're kind and gracious also not only to forgive, but you're kind enough to give the guidance, Lord. Our world is terrified and enraged even at the concept that you could speak to us about sexual matters. But if you didn't, Father, you'd be no father. But because you love us and you are our Father, you speak to us and you guide us and you give us the guidance that a loving Father would. Father, every single person in this room, every single person in this world, including the person holding the microphone, is a sexual sinner, an imperfect person who is in need of your kindness and of your grace, Father. And what our soul needs is not for another human to fully know us and fully love us, which can't happen because they're imperfect too. What we need is for our Heavenly Father to make eye contact with us, to whisper to our hearts that we are fully known, that we are fully loved, we're fully embraced, we're fully forgiven, and we're also fully guided in a way that our history does not have to become our future because we have your power and your guidance in our corner. We thank you, Jesus, for this truth. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for being with us. If these messages are strengthening you in your faith, we want to hear from you. Find us online at missioncity.nyc or email us at info@missioncity.nyc so we can celebrate everything God's doing in your life. We'll see you next week.